Hello YouTube, this is Answers in Logic, Episode 3, answering 1-minute demonstration to prove evolution / abiogenesis comedy by Created Dinos.
I'm reshooting the end of this video because I realized after posting it the first time with my previous comments that everybody didn't catch on to the fact that this was a joke. Of course you can't prove anything scientifically through an experiment like this. What you do is you take which scenario best fits the evidence, and that's what we want to do.
You asserted that one should take the scenario which best fits the evidence. This is nonsensical and unscientific. One should, in fact, take the evidence and then come up with a conclusion based upon the evidence. That's how science works.
Now, if you start with the assumption that evolution, this is where the key is, because there are PhDs on both sides of this debate. You've got very intelligent, very smart people who say there must have been something supernatural that started all this. And then you've got others who say, no, it was naturalistic. The reason for that is the starting assumption.
The only starting assumption in science is uniformitarianism. That is the statement that things operate today as they operated in the past. Basically, it just means things like the laws of physics weren't magically different 1,000 years ago, with no discernible reason for why they should be different.
If you don't want God to be there, or you've decided that science means naturalism, in other words, if we're going to do science, it means the explanation can never be supernatural, then of course you're going to come up with evolution. It's the only option.
Science is defined by the Journal of Theoretics as the observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena. Such activities restricted to a class of natural phenomena, such activities applied to an object of inquiry or study. Definitionally, for something to be science, it has to be natural. You can believe in the supernatural, but the supernatural is definitionally not scientific. I'm not opposed to you believing the supernatural. I'm not opposed to you trying to convince other people to believe in the supernatural. I'm opposed to you mislabeling it as scientific.
I mean, come on. I will believe evolution if I could be sure that there was no God and the supernatural was impossible.
Evolution does not imply that there is no God. It does not imply that there is no supernatural. Evolution makes no comment on the supernatural. It makes no comment on the origin of life. It only makes comment on the diversity of life and how that diversity arose. Asserting that you will only accept it if the supernatural can be completely and totally disproven not to exist is utterly nonsensical, as evolution has nothing to do with the supernatural.
But we can't prove that. And you can't demonstrate that God is not there. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of evidence He is there. So with that being said, if you include that possibility, if you include the possibility that maybe God created or nature created itself, when you compare the two, it's obvious.
That statement was a prime example of the straw man fallacy. The theory of evolution does not state that, quote, nature created itself, end quote. The theory of evolution makes no comment on the origin of life, nor does it make comment on the existence or non-existence of various deities. The theory of evolution could still be entirely valid if life was created by a deity. The only thing the theory of evolution says is that allele frequencies change with time. This has been observed. This has been proven.
It's just like a crime scene investigation. You go to the crime scene, you look at the evidence, you look at the fingerprints, you look at the blood on the wall, you look at the body laying on the floor, and you do your best to determine what happened here. But if all the evidence points to your mother as the criminal, and you don't want your mother to be guilty, what do? You reinterpret the evidence. It can't be that because my mother wouldn't do that. She's not a criminal. Maybe it was this person, maybe it was that person. You reinterpret the evidence, and that's what evolutionists do, is they look at the evidence and they reinterpret it because they don't want God to be the one who committed the crime.
You gave the example of a crime scene investigation in which an investigator would discover that the murderer was his own mother. You then go on to say that this parallels people who accept the theory of evolution. You say that they don't want, quote, God to be the one who committed the crime, end quote. This is nonsensical, as it does not mirror the scientific method at all. Let's take your scenario and say that I am the one who arrives on the scene and my mother has brutally axe murdered someone, and I see her holding an axe that's dripping with blood and the person on the floor dead, and she says, I just killed this man with my axe. Now, I personally could be in denial and say, no, observable reality is wrong. Observable reality, this can't be right. It has to be this other explanation. That's a pretty good example of what creationists do. But that is not my point. My point is that I would not be the only investigator were this to be a parallel of the scientific method. There would be many other investigators. They would each write their own observations. They would publish their observations. Other people would validate and go through their observations to make sure that they were consistent and not nonsensical. There is a set of checks and balances. I would be overridden as the weight of evidence pointed towards my mother being the axe murderer. In this way, one person's potential bias is rendered completely and totally moot. That's how science works. That is also why science works.
Research it for yourself. Find out the truth. We look at these things, and some of the fossils that I've been studying, this is Australopithecus here, and I look at these different things, and I'm a creationist, and we come up with very different interpretations because we have a different starting point.
The scientific starting point is an observable reality. Your starting point is not an observable reality. Your starting point is not scientific. You are free to express your starting point to any who may listen. You are free to express your opinions to any who may listen to your opinions. Your opinions, however, are not scientific.
And I think that if you take it seriously and you look at the evidence like I did, you'll come to the same conclusion that I did. And even if I don't persuade you, maybe you'll learn some things you didn't know about the creationist argument that you didn't hear before.
Creationism is not about looking at the evidence. It's about ignoring monstrous, mountainous piles of evidence and making baseless assertions.
When you listen to evolutionists who try and tell you what the creationist argument is, like what has changed, I've seen on many evolutionary websites where they say, oh, creationists believe that God created all the animals separately, but that's not what we teach. We teach that animals have changed over time and that they've become different species.
Animals changing over time is representative of their allele frequencies changing over time, which is definitionally evolution. I don't see what your contention with evolution is. Also, there is no such thing as an evolutionist. It is a word made up by snake oil salesmen who wish to categorize evolution as a religion to make it seem as nonsensical as the religious interpretations of reality.
We have a different classification compared to what the Bible says, as opposed to how we classify animals today.
The creationist classification system is called Baraminology. Baraminology is defined by the Nation Master Encyclopedia as a system for classifying life into groups having no common ancestry called baramins. Classification is based on a literal creationist reading of kinds in Genesis, especially the distinction between mankind and the other animals. Supplementary criteria include the ability of animals to interbreed and the similarity of their observable traits. Like all of creation science, baraminology is pseudoscience and is unrelated to science. Modern biological facts have shown that all life descended from one common ancestor. The scientific alternative to baraminology is cladistics, which classifies species based on evolutionary history. Baraminology is not science. Kinds has never been defined rigorously.
If a bacteria gets a little mutation, that's a different species of bacteria. But if a human has a mutation, they're still both humans. So, again, even the word species has a lot of variety.
Biochem.northwestern.edu states that a group of organisms belong to the same biological species if they are capable of interbreeding to produce fertile offspring. That is your test of species. If the human you made up who has a mutation can still breed with humans and produce fertile offspring, then it is still a human. It is still in our species. The same applies to the bacteria. The only time in which this test would not apply would be if the bacteria was asexual, in which case the biological test of species would not be available, so it would be a morphological test based on anatomical similarities. That's the only possible way the definition can vary.
And you have to be open-minded enough to realize that, stop being thick-headed like I used to be and just think that, those bumbling idiots out there, they're just trying to believe by faith. And if you actually look at the evidence, I think it might bring you to an uncomfortable but true conclusion.
What but faith are creationists using to get to their conclusion? Whatever it is, it's definitely not science, as science definitionally cannot reach a supernatural conclusion.